And we're back. It's Discourse or Death,
Yes.
episode 4. And that's the
Cool.
same number of people, ironically, that are listening to this program.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Steven. That's Daniel. And today we're going to bring you Icelandic Anarchy. So through the 9th-ish, 10th, 11th, and 12th centuries, we're going to talk about what they did in Iceland. And it was really interesting. And obviously, I think I'm a little partial to it because those are my peeps, my ancestral people.
Mm-hmm.
But Daniel, in our previous episode on anarchy, really wanted to look at, okay, is anarchy realistic, and have we seen it in history before?
Yeah.
And that's the thought process.
This is one of the longer lasting anarchic, at least anarchy adjacent societies that we have found, and hopefully we can maybe make this an ongoing thing. We go over a different society that uses a different order of organization every couple of weeks or whatever. We're starting with the Vikings today.
Yes. So, how did Viking society work? What did they do? So
Right.
It was pretty awesome. I mean, it lasted for about 300 years,
Mm-hmm.
from about the 1940s to
940s.
940s. I said 19, yeah, just so used to saying that. 940 to 1262. Because there was nobody in Iceland, and they could kind of do the thing.
Yeah. Oh, and it's not for a lack of trying. So like, they tried colonizing it, throughout the 9th century, like 870s, but no one could successfully get it because it's freaking Iceland, and they didn't have enough hay or whatever other materials needed to actually successfully establish a colony. And then eventually they got it around 940-ish is the earliest reference I was able to find.
We don't have enough hay.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me, like, if you're playing Warcraft or something, and you're building something, and they're like, you do not have enough materials.
Pretty much. Not enough pylons.
They didn't hack enough little digital trees down and move it over to Iceland.
Mm-hmm. And then it ended when all of Iceland submitted to the crown of Norway because invasion of Christianity and amongst other things.
Yep. Okay, so let's talk about how did this Icelandic society operate? What is the basic structure of said society?
All right, so we found that Iceland was divided into, I want to say 4 fjords. It's like fjord.
Oh yeah, so disclaimer. I mean, some of these things we've heard pronounced and know how to pronounce. The other things we're going to butcher thoroughly. So just roll with it. If you want to read up on it, you can read up on it. But we're going to butcher it. So
you can annotate what I'm trying to say. It's a fjordunker.
We'll just go with fjord, maybe, or region.
Fjord or region. We'll just say
fjord or region.
It's Norse for quarter, so we're just going to say quarter. So it's divided into 4 quarters. Then each quarter was subdivided into 9 godards, and each godard was ruled by a gothi. So there are 9 gothi for a total of ideally 36. I've seen references to 39. I don't know where the other 3 came from.
The other 3 were added in the 10th century. I just read that. Yeah, okay. It didn't explain why exactly, but they just decided they needed 3 more somehow. So there you go.
Why they decided they needed a 5th court, which we will get to.
Correct.
And then so we have the 9 godards, and then each godard was further subdivided into 3 things. So there's 3 things per godard, 9 godards per quarter, and 4 quarters in Iceland. Each gothi, of which there are 9 per quarter, was supported by his thingmen. Thingmen are usually carls or jarls. By the way, there are 3 different tiers of society, I suppose. Yeah, classes. So you have your thralls, which are your slaves. Thraldom was actually outlawed around like 1117. So they actually ended slavery in Iceland pretty early in relation to the rest of the world. Then you had the carls, which were your farmers. I think there was still limited thraldom in the case of you couldn't pay a fine, but we'll get to that. you have your carls, which were your farmers and craftsmen, it's basically everyone who did the mill work. And then you had your jarls, which were the landowners. Well, not necessarily the landowners, because some carls could own land, but they're like the real big landowners, the ones who had a lot of the wealth. Um, in relation to jarls and Gulthi, you'd have so all your Gulthi, who were the heads of the Goddards, they would be your jarls. But there would be jarls who were not Gulthi, and they would support whatever Gulthi that they had their best interest, basically.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to wrap your head around. That's why I found it helpful to actually read about this several times, because the interactions and the interplay is just very alien, really, from what we have in a more totally statist society,
right?
But pretty awesome. So your Gothi, just to recap for our four people listening, is your Gothi are your lords, essentially, okay, and your Goddard are the people that's kind of like his people, made up of Thingmen. And the Thingmen are just free men, okay. Now the cool thing about the society is that the Thingmen can choose at any given time which Gothi to work with, to work under, right?
Yeah,
there's no like you have to be House Stark forever, or
right.
you could switch from House Stark, you could go over to Targaryen, you might like there might be some legal discourse or whatever, but it didn't seem like a big deal. Okay, so which is cool if you're actually trying to make an anarchy work, because it behooves a benevolent leader, right? You can't be this tyrant dude that's sending people off to war and killing people and demanding stuff from people constantly, because guess what? Your folks will just up and leave.
Yeah,
so
that was an interesting. Really. That's a really interesting thing about the society is that at least outside of the quarters, what was ruled by Goddards and Gulthi wasn't necessarily assigned by region, right? So you can live in one area, but have allegiance to whatever Gulthi you freaking wanted. You would still have to pay like tribute to him, so you would get that protection or whatever spoils of war, as because that's a thing that happened in Viking society. But it didn't matter where you lived.
Yeah, which is super cool. Yeah, keep riffing, man. You're doing an awesome job. So that's kind of like the overarching structure of society. So I think it's important to understand that, but then it's equally as important to understand how their legal system worked.
Yeah.
And the nice thing about Icelandic society, I mean, I like the legal system, but there's a lot of writings, like they were all about it. Like it was very important in their society, where your average person was essentially at any given time could be an attorney for themselves or against somebody else. So it was very important that a free man could speak to these things.
Right. In fact, we'll go a little bit into the judicial system. Well, at the very, very lowest level, so there are 5 systems, but to kind of bounce on what you're saying, the lowest level, the plaintiff and the defendant actually had to choose their own legal course, legal counsel, whether it's like friends or family or whatever. So it was important that everyone in society is at least somewhat competent in laws there.
Right, because the main difference, in my opinion, the main difference between their court system and what we have now in most states is this is a stateless society. Okay, so there is no overarching state to bring prosecution or case on somebody. It is up to the defendant, the person that was infringed upon, that was, their family member was killed, what have you. It is up to them to push forth these legal proceedings to try to get some kind of resolution. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so those people, like we said, it would be up to them to push these things forward. Or another really cool aspect of the society is that right to prosecute somebody else was actually sellable. So say you were just a poor person, working the land, and there's some inadvertent manslaughter, let's say. Well, everybody had a certain price that had to be paid in retribution for a manslaughter or murder or what have you. Well, these poor people couldn't afford to actually bring forth these cases to a court. So they could sell that right to somebody that had the resources to do it and wanted to make a name for themselves as like a good lawyer or attorney, and could also then get the spoils from said case.
Yeah. There's actually two parts to that, right? Because well, there's two things. There's civic case and criminal cases. So in civic cases, things would typically just go as exactly as you said. So if a poor person couldn't necessarily afford to go to a judge or prosecute, then yeah, they could sell the right to be a plaintiff. I keep saying plaintiff for some reason. And yeah, they would either A, get what was due to them, or B, get a little bit of extra compensation depending on how much the person who they hire out, they can get more reward from the defendant. In the case of criminal cases, there were enforcers or thief takers, which basically acted as bounty hunters, who would actually go and find the person who did whatever crime and then bring him in to be tried as necessary. And that too was something that you could sell, right? So enforcers couldn't just go get someone, and then if someone spends all this time finding someone, another enforcer kind of snipe the bounty from under them. Nah, the right to actually prosecute the bounty was also something that the plaintiff or the victim could sell. So everything was transactional there.
Yep. And I'm glad you brought up that point, because that's also often a common thing that people bring up when really analyzing anarchies is, well, what would stop somebody from just, last minute somebody else would swoop in and get them, and well, there's still an overarching law structure that has to be upheld.
Right.
But the cool thing is there's no state to actually enforce that, right? So like these laws are created.
Well, we should talk a little bit about the court hierarchy, because it's ultimately the top one that
you're doing a great job laying it out. So go into the court hierarchy.
All right. So there are 4 eventual 5 levels of court. So we're going to start from the bottom, and then we'll make our way up here. So we already went over the local courts, which were basically just private courts. The members of the court were chosen by the plaintiff and the defendant, and then they would come to a decision. The one interesting thing is that there's no real executive branch in Viking society, right? So it's the court will pass their judgment or whatever, and then, as Steve was saying, it's ultimately up to the defendant to extract the reward. In some cases, if the defendant didn't pay or wasn't able to pay, they might be enlisted in thraldom, so they would have to work until the debt was paid off. If they just kind of skipped town and wanted to avoid all that stuff, then the court could actually make the defendant an outlaw, and then that outlaw loses their rights, so they could be killed on sight, right?
And their property seized as well.
Or they could be exiled, so they wouldn't be an outlaw, so you can't just outright kill them, but they would be exiled for 3 years or something, and then they come back and try to resume normal society. So that's if they decide to just not pay or not go with what the judgment was at all. If they have enough money, they could kind of escalate, right? And then they go up to the next court. So after the private courts, you have the Varthing. So the Varthing consists of 36 judges. To my understanding, everything consisted of 36 judges. They always had 36, and you would need at least a majority vote of 30 for any legal case to be executed, basically. If they couldn't reach 30, it was the case was pretty much thrown out. I'm not sure how they resolved it after that. So the Varthing was kind of the next level. So it's like we have 3 things, right? So each thing would have 12 representatives, and then you'd have this bar thing, which would be the court of the Goddard. Then you have the quarter thing, which wasn't used as much, but this was pretty much the court of the quarter. And then after the quarter thing, you have the all thing. And this is basically the Supreme Court. The all thing would meet for 2 weeks every year. They would decide, or these are the laws. They'd vote on what laws they want, what laws they don't. And the people who made up the all thing was the so each Gothi had, so what we said, we had so the 4 things, 9 Gothi per, or sorry, 4 quarters, 9 Gothi per quarter, and then each Gothi of said quarter was able to choose a judicial rep. So they weren't actually the judicial rep. They picked someone to represent them, and yeah, the one, and then each of these positions could be bought and sold or inherited or just given away. So none of these positions were permanent either, right? This could lead to consolidation of power, and for some richer families, it didn't actually do that for a while, but it did happen eventually. The one actual permanent member on this highest court was someone called the Logsumdar.
Yeah, the law speaker.
The law speaker. So he was chosen he was chosen every 3 years by a quarter, and then the quarter that was given the opportunity to choose the law speaker was actually drawn by a lot. So every 3 years, a quarter would choose a new law speaker, and it's the law speaker's job to learn all of the laws that are decided by the all thing every year or so. So all free people, Carls, Jarls, etc., at least somewhat familiar with the law system, because they are always in it, because people be beefing. But it's one person who had to know everything.
Yeah, and their tenure was 3 years long, because at each all thing they would recite orally a third of the law. So this is also before you actually had like written full records of all of this stuff, right? So you had this oral tradition that had to be passed down, and also had this like mnemonic and rhyming element to it, so that it was actually able to be memorized, rather than just trying to read a full book of code, which would be next to impossible, right? Yeah, so they would recite a third of the law at the all thing. Yeah, the Gothi would bring a bunch of their men with them, which I thought was an interesting point. They bring a bunch of their men with them, especially if they thought they were going to get into it with another house. Because you just want some muscle back up. If you were a free man under the Gothi and you didn't want to go to the all thing, you could actually pay like a taxation to the Gothi to just help him cover the cost of the travel. Because for some of these clans, if you were out in the fringes, because the all thing met pretty central in Iceland, some of these clans had like a serious journey to make, and other ones it wasn't so bad. So it'd help them recoup the costs. And then when they're at the all thing, they had beautiful lakes, streams nearby. So they actually, once they got there, because Iceland can be pretty sparse in places, right, and pretty hard to deal with.
Oh.
But once they
you broke up for me there. What was that?
Oh yeah. I was just saying, once they actually got there, back then you were always thinking about traveling, food, these things. So once they got there, they had enough fishery there on the water nearby that they can fish and hunt and make a go of it and actually live those 2 weeks out. So they didn't actually have to bring a lot of stuff, but the travel itself to get there could be pretty harsh and serious. There's just a lot of barren areas of Iceland that some clans would have to travel to get there.
Right.
And so they'd use those 2 weeks to pass laws, handle disputes. They'd get rid of laws that weren't helpful to people or to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a really big deal in their society.
Yeah, and everyone pretty much everyone can go if they had the ability to do so, to try to be represented. And yeah, it's pretty much just a grand old time for 2 weeks.
Mhm.
There was a lot of feuds to be disputed, for sure. There was a lot of fightings between the different goatees and different quarters. In fact, it got to a point that they would have to have a mediator who, if they had like these really big fights, they would have someone to say like, okay, I will step in before you kill so many people you can't pay for it anymore. Because that was the thing. So there was this thing called what was it, the Vergold?
Yes.
Which
the Vergold is the price for killing. So there's a price for killing, and then there's the Vodmal, which is the price that you would have to pay somebody's family if you killed that person.
Right. Well, the Vodmal is the currency.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yep, yeah. You're right. So the Vergold is just I'm sorry.
Yeah, the Vergold is if someone dies, this is how much they're worth. So slaves are usually worth a year and a half worth of their economic output, and a free person, Carl Jarl, would be worth 12 to 24 years, depending on how important they were in society. And so if the murderer was able to pay that much, then the plaintiff and defendant would basically say, all right, we're square, and call it good. If they weren't able to pay it, they would either have to, work as a slave for the plaintiff, or the plaintiff might just up and kill him if he can't afford it. The law is kind of in their hands at that point, especially if you can't pay and he's made an outlaw. Well, all bets are off at that point. But of course, if you can afford it, which a lot of these people could, you gotta just kind of call it square, ideally. There was an example of it was a long-standing feud between two women, actually, who would basically, they would have, like, it was a lot of silver, which is enough to pay off someone that they killed, and they would kill that person, give that silver to that family. The family would then kill someone on their side, give that same bag of silver right back. They would just exchange it until eventually it got out of hand. I forgot. I don't remember exactly how they ended it, but I thought that was kind of hilarious.
So maybe they just ran out of people. Maybe that's how it ended.
Maybe. But yeah, so if people can find a loophole, man.
Yep, people will do it. That's one thing I think we both admit, right? It's like there's no perfect system. Like we try to get it as perfect as possible, but you always have that human element that's going to make it so that there's always going to be some kind of workaround that somebody figures out.
Like that kind of, which ultimately led to the collapse of the society, is the power of all the Gothards and Gothies became centralized within not one person, but like families of people. So you could have enough. A family can be more than 36 people, right? So they just get all their cousins and extended cousins to rule whatever area. And then you have enough power to really influence other areas that maybe you shouldn't. And that's ultimately what brought everything down. Because eventually, like one family had enough power, and then they had power. They ended up kind of negotiating with Norway and pledged allegiance to that king. It's like, oh, we're kind of the head dudes here. Give us some more funding, and we'll try to influence the rest of Iceland for you. And that is eventually what happened. But up to that point, right. Yeah, I think.
Let's riff on that for a minute, because this is I think we might slightly disagree on that point. So that's totally what happened, right? But you framed it as like, well, this is kind of like a failure of the Icelandic system, where I don't view it as that. That's just like a intrusion from a larger state ultimately that caused that problem, right? So you did have these Gothi families, some of them to becoming very powerful, yeah, for sure. but then they got more money and power and influence put into their family by Norway, and that was finally the death nail in the coffin. That,
yes, yeah,
like additional power and backing and money was able to let that family finally just take everything over.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'd frame it as like a failing of the system necessarily, but again, just human nature. Some people want to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't necessarily call it a failure. I just say,
okay.
I would just say, oh, this is the logical conclusion, right? So if you have a nation state that doesn't really have any centralized power structure, if an outside power has the power to influence like even a small part initially, that outside power can ultimately like just wipe out everything or influence everything. So, you just become a member of that kingdom or whatever. And that's even in my perfect example of anarchism, where we'd have a lot of smaller anarchist states where people can kind of go back and forth as they want. There's nothing keeping in a larger external power from influencing one and eventually growing that influence. I don't think there's much of a deterrent to that unless everyone participated in anarchism, or we have these, or we have these large nations, these larger governments that we see today.
Yeah, totally agree. Because otherwise, you're gonna, and we see that now, right? Not necessarily anarchies, but we see that's like a proxy war, right? Kind of like Norway kind of declared a proxy war against the rest of Iceland through this one family. And I mean, we do that in the Middle East all day, every day. And so do the Russians, and so do the Chinese, and the Chinese are doing that in Africa now. Well, happened for a while. So yeah, the anarchy, I don't think will really work unless you could get the planet to do it.
Yeah, it ultimately needs to be a global system. But I think as far as how we could apply it to our country, I think one of the really important things to note is there weren't really prisons in Iceland, right? So it's like, if you steal something, well, you pay the cost of the thing that you stole, maybe the wages of the person who produced the thing that you stole, and then you went on your way, right? But there was no losing months to years of your life for misdemeanors, which was what we see in our society. I think that's something we should absolutely think about bringing here.
We already know the prison system is messed up, right? We already know people are not rehabilitated out of their prison experience. If anything, they're made more hardened criminals through the influence and new networking opportunities of being in prison. So yeah, I think the Icelandic system is.
Yeah, so I think. Yes, I was going to say, so taking at least that much would be a great idea. I think we have. So they did have kind of a state, but there wasn't like one particular ruler of the state. It was and maybe this is antithetical to anarchy, but it was kind of a true democracy in the sense where they would have, well, not the truest democracy because every single person didn't vote on what laws were passed, but representatives from each area were more or less had equal say in the matter because they had the 36 members, well, basically nine Gulthi of each quarter, right? Which I guess would be the equivalent to the electoral college here.
Kind of, sort of.
But kind similar. Of, but they're actually deciding on the laws instead of, well, who do we vote in to make the laws? They're divided. They're just deciding on the laws directly.
Right. Which I like, just because it's one less degree of separation, right? So you've got people voting for and passing law that more directly reflect and help, or maybe in other cases hurt, but it's more ground level, right?
Right.
Where especially now in America, maybe not so much in its founding, you just got all these layers of bureaucracy so that the people that are actually passing these laws are just so far removed from your average
Mm-hmm.
person that even if their intentions were good, they're they're not going to really understand how this affects people.
Right. And I think it's important to note that Icelandic, I got to pull up this reference. I think the population, that's what I wanted to talk about. Yeah, so by 1311, it was a population of approximately 72,000 people. All right, so we're not talking about a nation of many, many millions. You know, it's a couple tens of thousands of people who are making this work, which is once again why I think it works best at a smaller scale. It's easier to make laws at a local level when that local level is also kind of the top of the food chain, right? And there's not some higher power who can dictate, well, this is what you need to do to make things work. When they don't necessarily have any idea what the ground level situation is like. Yeah, another reason why I think smaller states would work better, because they would know how to, if there was a pooling of resources, if it was that kind of society, they would know better how to actually allocate them, because they know what's going on at that local area, and for how many thousands of people. But once you get to a, you know, many millions of people, at least in this example, I'm not sure it would have worked as well. And we'll have to find, you know, larger examples of anarchist societies, of course, to find how they made it work. But yeah, smaller scale, it worked for about 300 years.
Yeah, I mean I think that's crazy impressive, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, still a massive area, right, that these people were living in, that they still ultimately had laws that they all agreed on, even if there wasn't so many, even if it wasn't like that many people, it's still a large amount of area that was more or less uniformly governed, which I think is pretty impressive. They even had
Oh, go ahead.
They even had safe spaces for outlaws. So if an outlaw, there were like 3 areas in Iceland that if you're an outlaw, you could kind of take you and your family there, and people wouldn't screw around with you, because otherwise, you know, it's on site. They see your life is forfeit if you meet the wrong person. But this wasn't the case.
Apparently there were 2 levels of outlaw. So you had kind of like
Right.
you had the minor outlaw and then the major outlaw. The minor outlaws got the protections that you're talking about.
Right.
And like
right.
if you were on a road traveling to one of these major locations, as long as you were on the road, or they set the spear length away from the road, like if you're letting a cart pass or something, you're good. You're somewhere else, not so much.
Yeah. And I would have to wonder how we would make something like that work in our society. It's like, okay, well, if you were an outlaw, we don't send you to prison. You have to like go fend for yourself in the woods or something, because you're no longer allowed to be a part of polite society. But you know, it's also when you get to, once again, smaller society, so people could actually kind of keep track of who was an outlaw and who isn't, at least in their local regions. Not sure that could happen as easily here, but
I don't know. Maybe. I mean,
well, maybe with that technology. Okay, never mind.
Well, I'm just drawing parallels between homeless people and outlaws in that society, right?
Right. Yeah, and I was thinking about that as well, actually.
Not that the homeless people have necessarily done anything wrong to like deserve that state.
Right.
But we kind of treat it in the same way, right? Like
we do.
If some homeless person got murdered, no one's going to care. You're not going to hear about that anywhere. No one's going to investigate that, more than likely, unless it was some kind of like weird serial thing, maybe.
Yeah.
So, and in each society, I mean, in Indian society, they're very well known for their low caste system, where, I mean, they disappear and get murdered and abducted all the time, and no one cares. Like those people just don't give a hoot about it.
Yeah.
So at least, I don't know, at least in the Icelandic society, you had to do something real bad to get there.
Mhm.
Right.
Right.
Where
Right.
where there's nothing else I found that showed like, oh well, we just have, well, there's outlaws and then there's the Joftarn, which are, you know, the homeless people. You know,
Yeah.
there's
No,
like,
nothing like
no,
that.
you're doing something.
Yeah. I
For
mean, even
somebody.
slaves when they had them had a place to stay.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. I think if
And still had
honestly,
an inherent value, right? I mean, like,
mhm,
you know, they were, you know, their property, but that property was valuable.
yeah. I think if we can get to a point in our society where we just solve homelessness, which other, and we can talk about the homelessness that has been requested a few times. I think if Sweden, one of those random Scandinavian countries, quote unquote, solved homelessness by just giving everyone a house. Like there are still some homeless people, but they cut the number drastically. You know, so if we had a system like that, because we can house everyone in this country if we wanted to.
Definitely.
If we had a system like that where everyone was housed, and we can, and this is also kind of how they do it in the Singaporean model, which is something that we'll have to talk about at a later time, where everyone is a house, and yeah, it's if you do something illegal and become an outlaw, you're all of your property and everything that you've earned is forfeit, and you are basically exiled and you have to be a homeless person. Yo, dude, if we made all bankers homeless people instead of just throwing them into jail, not all bankers, but you know the
evil
bankers I'm talking
bankers.
about. You know the bankers I'm talking about.
The globalist Goldman Sachs bankers. I'm
Mhm.
jiving.
Yeah. I would love to live in that society.
Would it
You
cure
know, the,
things? I don't know. Would it feel good? Yes, it
it
would.
would feel wonderful. Hey, if everyone who's just trying their best and isn't ruining the lives of millions of people, or a murderer just has a house, okay. And if you do those things that are deeply, deeply immoral and lots of people suffer from it, whether it's, you know, putting out medicine that's untried and kills a bunch of people like Bayer did like in the 90s, or, you know, we can talk about the housing crisis and all these other things that we see like this in the corrupt financial sectors, but everyone else has a house otherwise, and we just make those guys go homeless. Yeah, let's go. You know, like as you said, we've shown that prison doesn't really work.
Right.
You know, so if we changed, if we made it so our prison system actually rehabilitated those who could be rehabilitated, because there are other countries who that can make things work. Obviously, we can't because we're America. Then yeah, sure, but that's only if rehabilitation is the goal. If we get it so like, all right, we have this one financial guy and he they're okay, maybe a group of financial guys or whatever who cook the books and say bad loans are good, and they make X, and they basically siphon X amount of billions of dollars from society, be it people who will lose their homes, etc., etc., and they can't pay that back to like each individual person who was wronged, as opposed to just like a fat check to the government itself, and they have to go homeless for that.
Then you're outcast.
Yeah, yeah, I'm
You're
fine
an
with that.
outlaw.
You're an outlaw. You can't own property, no matter whatever billions of dollars you had are forfeit. Honestly, the more we talk about it, the more I'm in favor of it. I think these Vikings are onto something, man.
I'm telling you, I think the Vikings are onto something. But the key difference, I think, is, so like in us trying to integrate it with our society, as your example right now, you would have the state doing this stuff. Right. So like the state would decide who's an outlaw, the state would convict you, the state would take your stuff. But in Icelandic society, there's no state to do that, right? It's up to the people to do that. Anyway, so in Icelandic society, it's not the state's job to do that because there is no state.
Right.
But I think that's what would actually keep it pure and on the up and up. Because with every state situation, we always have, you know, you've got China, you've got Russia, you've got the Nazis back in the day. You always have the state making an enemy of people just because, right? Because they're the bad guy. The Jews, you got to die because you're Jews.
Right.
You know. But in Icelandic society, you're going to avoid that problem because it behooves everybody to work together and not try to screw each other over like that. There's no big brother to decide that now the Jews are bad, right? It's kind of like a built-in checks and balance.
Right.
So
I think it is important to note that people couldn't just go take money from people, right? Like they did need authorization from whatever court that they're at to decide in their favor, and then it was in their rights to prosecute, right? But they did that as an individual, or they would round up their friends or however many people they would need to go take care of business, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So I think that's the difference. I think anytime that you have the state dictating these things, eventually it's bound for corruption, and it's going to be bad, like real bad corruption.
Right. So, I mean, so for us to be able to implement it in our society, we would, I don't see a way to do it without, and we briefly touched on this, without like really evening the playing field between the poors and the super rich, because if all of these positions can be bought and sold, basically there's nothing in our society currently keeping one or two people buying every representative that's available. And maybe they don't buy it themselves, but they'll have representatives who represent them, who are able to buy these things. We need to figure out a way around that. Maybe it comes in the form of a new currency entirely, so everyone initially has a little bit, they're a little bit closer to parity in wealth, as opposed to having like the super rich versus the rest of us. But it would be hard to implement in America with our current wealth distribution.
Yeah, it'd be a challenge. I'm glad you brought up money, though, because we haven't
always
talked
about money. I'm always going to bring up money.
Well, we haven't talked about the Icelandic money system yet.
Oh no.
So I misspoke earlier. So there's two recognized currencies in this Icelandic society. You had the vadmál, which is this cloth that's sewn together, and it was yay big. We've got the exact dimensions. I can pull up here in a minute. And silver. I'm just going to look up these dimensions real quick. So what is interesting,
valuable because it was rare. Most of their silver came from
Oh no, go ahead.
Yeah, so most of the silver came from them pillaging Englishmen. But the vadmál is valuable because, one, you needed to use sheep's wool to produce it, and then it took a very long time to make vadmál that was at a quality worthy of being used in currency, right? So kind of how some cryptocurrency today, their value to an extent is based on the processing or computing power required, and by proxy the energy used to produce each coin.
And you just weren't messing around. You just went right into crypto. You're like, boom,
crypto. Yeah.
Boom. I mean, that's where I wanted to go eventually too, because you can't help but draw those conclusions. So for the audience, so the vadmál was usually made by, usually women, but whoever could be in the home. And it took, quite a bit of time to actually make it. It was very care and craft intensive thing. But that's what made it inherently valuable. And you're in a crazy cold place without modern technology. So it's important to stay warm with all this stuff, right?
Yep.
And there was a meter in the length, just to have everybody picture it in their head. But this was a way for your average person to actually just generate money. How cool is that?
Yep.
And how decentralizing is that? And that also brings about better liberty and freedom for your average person, because they don't have to go slave away, either figuratively or literally, for someone else to get silver or dollars, they can actually make it. I mean, you'd have to have some wool, but
Right.
say you had the wool and you're good to go.
Yeah, I mean, most of these people were farmers, so most of them at least had some sheep.
Mm-hmm.
Many of them.
And
even
so,
if they weren't like super rich, they had a little bit like to their name.
mm-hmm. but this, to me, it's a case point where having more, just it creates more wealth for everyone, does it not? So now we have. Oh, go ahead.
Can you say that one more time? You lost a little bit of it.
Oh, I said
I
it.
lost a little bit of your statement.
Oh, for me, it just shows that you can create more wealth for everyone through such a system where you're decentralizing money. You're not needing to get it from a bank or a loan from a lord or a handout from somebody. You can simply make it with what you have at hand. And those farmers had the wool. So today, what do we have? Well, we have electricity, we have computers. Computers are pretty commonplace now. Internet access is pretty commonplace now, at least in the first, second, and sometimes third world country. And what can you do with it? Well, you can mine digital monies, and there's all kinds of them.
Yeah.
And I think this is going to start, in my opinion, the revolution that'll eventually lead to the destruction of the state in all way, shape, and form. I don't know if I'll see it in my lifetime, but I think technology will get there to a point where it's totally feasible.
So one really important thing to note here, and I'm honestly kind of impressed with it, but it once again helps for them to be a smaller population, is they decided on what currencies to use. So it's silver and vodmal. Now that's it. As opposed, and so everyone had the ability to make currency, but also everyone decided on what currency was valid in that society. So also, it's important to note, as you said, that vodmal, not only did it have a worth based on it using a material and manpower to make it, it provided value to society because it's cold in Iceland. It's basically clothing, it's blankets or whatever you wanted to use it for. So if we have these cryptocurrencies such as ADA and XRP, which actually provide a service as well, and maybe we develop a crypto that kind of does all of these things at once, and we just agree that this is the currency that we trade, as opposed to this is the currency that holds value, like Bitcoin or whatever its equivalent will be in 5 years. Yeah, I could definitely see that being a thing that works, as long as you figure out how to get enough of that currency in the hands of enough people at a rate that it can maintain an economy.
Yeah, I think if we wanted to draw a parallel, we just it'd have to be a crypto that was mineable by an average person.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you got a laptop and internet connection, if you can actually mine it, then cool. And if not, then I could see it maybe being potentially problematic.
Right.
Like I don't even think your average person can mine Bitcoin anymore because of all the huge operations doing so.
Yeah.
And there's so much of it in circulation already.
Mm-hmm. Like 80% of all Bitcoin that's going to be issued has been issued. It has is that a cap of what, 222 million or
21 million?
I don't know.
21.
Most of it's 21 million. Yeah. Most of it's been issued. So it'd be hard pressed for people to start mining it now and get anything approaching enough to live on. But that doesn't have to be the case with the newer currency,
right? And there's a lot of parallels to be drawn between the crypto revolution now and just the start of the internet age, right? Where stuff just kind of has to shake out. Some things aren't going to make it, some things will.
Yep.
It's gotta give it time.
I would say if we have to kind of bring it into our society. So say we had all these loose federations of anarchist states, and they have their equivalent of the all thing every year, and over time they're able to decide on a currency to use. Well, let's say they'll give that currency maybe 2 or 3 years, so we have enough mining operations to get enough currency generated, and then when enough currency is in play, they'll issue that currency out to the various members of their Goddards used before, but everyone more or less has like a foot in the door. And maybe you can take, if you are super rich, you're able to exchange that. So a portion of that can go to whatever cryptocurrency is there. So you're not completely asked out if you're a rich person, but it'll make the playing field a little bit more equal for everyone. So people can participate in society slightly more equally. You know, so it's say if everyone gets 100 of this hypothetical coin and you're a billionaire, if you trade your many billions, you don't get like 5 billion of that coin. You might be able to get like 1,000 or 2,000. So instead of being thousands of times more wealthy than the average person, you're only like maybe 8 or 9 times more wealthy. Or 10 times, I don't know. And then capitalism can resume as needed.
Interesting idea. Obviously, fundamentally, I disagree with that because you're controlling something artificially. And again, we've just, I don't know. Well, I think controlling things artificially is not the answer.
Okay.
We need to get things decentralized so that no one can control it.
Well, what would you suggest be done then?
I think it's going to work itself out with this cryptocurrency situation. I really do. I think this is the future. The states are going to try to stop it, right? Because it is decentralizing. It takes power out of their hands. But I don't know how long and what they can exactly do about it long term.
Well, but how? So I proposed an idea on how we would at least get crypto in the hands of enough people that they could run a society. So maybe there's this one time some centralized figure says, hey, here's the crypto we're going to use. All of you guys get this crypto and I'll make it work. And everyone is then left to their own devices to generate crypto based on whatever mining apps that you're using, or just selling goods and services for said currency, and rich people will still have more abundance of it than everyone else. If you're saying that it'll just shake out, how do you think that will happen?
Well, so if you want in more detail, what I think, if we're using this Icelandic situation as an example again, then we would ultimately, as I kind of leaned on before, we just need a crypto that would be mineable for everybody. So then you could actually have everyone generating some kind of return, some kind of long-term wealth, just like this Vodmal, right?
Right. So the reason I kind of go to the having a pile of it generated initially and then dispersed is because if everyone can just generate it, well, there are people who have access to entire data centers. Someone who's mining something on their phone isn't going to be able to compete with someone who can have multiple data centers generating a currency for them. This is why China has as much power over Bitcoin as they do, because they have the grand majority of Bitcoin processing in the world. And we would see the same thing happen if it's just like, all right, everyone, go mine this new currency and figure it out.
But then, and yeah, you're totally right. But then what would keep that from happening anyway? Like in your situation, if you just made a bunch and gave it out, then more people that have the means are going to make more anyway. So you haven't
absolutely.
You haven't done anything.
But the point is to put everyone at least at a starting point. So that's why I give my example. Say you have 500 hypothetical Bitcoin currency, and hopefully that's enough to live for 2 or 3 years. I don't know. And then from there, then you're off to the races. So then you take that little nest egg of Bitcoin currency that everyone has been issued. Some people will have more because they're able to trade whatever currency we're using before to this new currency. So there'll still be some disparity, but everyone will have enough to get by at least initially. And then, so we'll have the super wealthy, they'll be able to make their Bitcoin currency, but everyone will at least have a similar starting point. And then you can still, completely fuck up your life just like anyone else would. But it wouldn't be because this initial currency wasn't available to you, which is closer to what we're saying today.
Interesting. It's interesting.
Yeah.
You totally broke up when the first time you explained that, so I was kind of
Ah, God damn it.
And you were on
All
the
right.
riff, man. You were just
I
like
know.
flowing, and I was like, I'm not gonna interrupt him. I'm just gonna let him talk.
All right. So let me say this again. God,
But no,
fucking...
that you just summarized it. That was good. That was good.
Okay. All
So
right. Okay.
so you just want like a playing field that's kind of like equal, and then let it
And
roll out.
then figure it out. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. It was interesting. I don't feel like I have a lot more to add to that necessarily. I just have faith in if you let markets work, they can do it. But as you know, we don't because we have giant corporations that buy up.
But everyone has to be able to participate. Everyone has to be able to participate in the market, though.
Yeah, but I don't. There's so few. I mean, there's so few people now that don't have internet in their house. There's so few people that don't have one of these. Like everyone can. I mean, everybody like people are buying and selling Bitcoin in Africa.
You mean
all over the place
for sure,
and on like old cell phones, right? Because they're still like poor in Africa, but they're doing the thing, and that's awesome.
But they are with what we have right now. People are not generating enough of a Bitcoin or any of these currencies on their own to be able to like provide for their family long term, right?
Well, not as it is right now.
If we have a currency,
now, like they could potentially, right? Like say you mined a little bit of Bitcoin or just transferred some dollars into a little bit of Bitcoin right now. I mean, if it continues to be adopted as it is, its value is going to skyrocket, at least compared to the dollar. And that said difference, maybe you could live for a year. I mean, we don't know where the buck's going to stop. I mean, hell, one Bitcoin right now is what, 30 something thousand. So, anyone in the US can live on $30,000 a year. You're not going to live in a super nice place, but you can do it, right?
Well, I mean, minimum wage is about no. Minimum wage, if it was $15,000, $15 an hour would be $30,000 a year. But I don't think there's anywhere in America right now where you can afford a 1-bedroom apartment on $30,000 a year, man.
Oh, I've done it. I've made less than $30,000 a year several times.
How long ago was this?
That was when I started personal training and I worked for LA Fitness. So that was 5 years ago. I rented a 1-bedroom apartment for $525 a month from just an independent landlord. And I made $12 an hour during that year.
Yeah, I want to say due to inflation and other circumstances that have happened, it's not as easy.
Oh, it wasn't easy then, but
I'm sure
we haven't seen enough inflation in 5 years to make it impossible. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying it's like ideal. I'm not even saying it's good. I'm just saying it's doable.
Maybe.
But so
maybe in certain parts of the country, okay, fine.
Oh yeah, I mean you couldn't be out where you're at, you'd be screwed.
Oh, you couldn't be where most of the population is.
Well, you'd have to be in the middle of the country somewhere, yeah.
Yeah, where there are less people competing for everything. And then honestly, I think we need to do something about it. If we're decentralizing currency, we need to decentralize the population as well.
So I agree. I agree. Yeah, the big city centers are, not great. Yeah. But that's a different topic. I'll look at
it. Yeah, definitely.
All right. So we covered government structure. We covered the legal system. We covered how they handled money. Is there anything else with the Icelandic anarchy that you want to get into that you feel like we may have missed? We've talked about the feasibility of it in America. Well, certain things, kind of like the legal system, money a bit.
I think if we were to talk, and this will be a very short riff, I think if we were to further extrapolate it to our society, we would talk about how the Gothies or the Godards, so people pledge allegiance to them based on basically the services and protections that they could offer. So I would think that things like utilities and limited law enforcement, um, I guess food delivery and things like that would be responsible to the Gothi or Godi or whatever the equivalent is. It's like, okay, I do these things for my thingmen if you pledge allegiance to me. And it would be in the example, it would be an example of all those things. And so you would, so I would assume, so you would do those things, whatever the fruits of your labor, I'm not sure if you would call it tax, but part of it would go to the Godi pot, so he's taken care of, and then he's given the resources to take care of his people to a very, very limited degree, right? And then also, I think that's also kind of how their military was formed to a certain extent. So if the Gothi or Godi wanted to go raid people, it's like, okay, hey, well, let me get a couple of my thingmen who I take care of, and we're gonna go pillage these fools, right?
Which was a way to gain notoriety and money, right? I mean, you would go Viking to go pillage some stuff to get stuff and silver.
Yeah.
So you didn't have to like pay a standing army. It was naturally incentivized by the men that were willing to go Viking, that, okay, well, we do this, but we're getting paid essentially to do it, although we are risking our lives in doing so.
Yeah. And so ideally in our society, we wouldn't have that.
You don't want to go Viking?
Well, we're trying to have an all voluntary we're pillaging people. That's not exactly voluntary for the people that we're pillaging. So
the pillagees. It would be bad for the pillagees.
Yeah, well, we don't want pillagees anymore, right? But yeah, we can talk about how to get around that, I guess, in another episode. But that is one more thing I wanted to bring up, because we conveniently left out all of the pillaging that was definitely going on.
There's no pillaging to be seen here. Move along. Move along.
It was all handled in the courts.
They were mostly English anyway.
Yeah,
it's fine.
All right. I got nothing else though, buddy.
Excellent. Yeah, I thought that was really good. I think you did an amazing job laying it out and explaining it. That was awesome. So thank you to our 4 listeners. And I apologize ahead of time for the massive editing that you have undoubtedly experienced.
Yeah, the internet decided to not.
Internet's not interneting.
Yeah, not at all.
Internet's taking a nap today.
A little bit.
So thank you, everybody, for this episode of Discourse of Death. I'm Steven.
I'm Daniel. Thanks for your time. All of our references will be in the links, and join our Discord.
In the show notes, join the Discord so you can complain about stuff and discourse like we do.
Yeah.
And come hang out, and then you can see where we're getting all our info, and you could help us out if you want. So
yeah. If anyone knows how to pronounce these myriad Viking things,
needs Viking pronunciation guide.
Yeah, let us know.
All right, thanks so much, everybody.
Bye.